where we left off last time was he had just gotten onto his yacht, the one that he had wanted to call Enchantress, but they put the kibosh on that and said, no, you have to call it something else. So now it's called the Fury. Interesting. And he has gone up there. He's departed with some of his friends who have said that they would go with him. Piers Lee, who had been his escort since 1919, decided to come with the prince indefinitely because he wanted to help him discover his new life. He was very faithful and he was willing to follow his master wherever. So Piers Lee is on the ship with him, along with several other individuals who decided to come and hang out with him. Ulick Alexander was one of his friends, and they have departed on this yacht. Now, it says here that it was 2 a.m. when they got on that boat. It was right after he had given his speech to the nation. I'm abdicating. I'm leaving you in good hands. I will always love you. My brother is a wonderful guy. You can trust him. He's going to do great things. And if England ever needs anything from me, I will do all that I can to help. It's like, well, they didn't need you. They needed you to be king, but I guess you didn't mean that part. So he gives his sorry, sad little speech, and then he promptly goes onto his yacht. Now remember, his attitude this entire time has been one of jubilation. He is thrilled beyond measure. He just feels like he's hit the jackpot. Finally, he can go do what he wants to do. He didn't have to have any responsibility. It's all so exciting for him. But the rest of the family was devastated. I mean, all of his brothers were crying. And you'll recall from last chapter, Winston Churchill wept openly about this. He was devastated. He had begged David to stay on as king. Now, I don't really know why Winston Churchill would have done that, because David was of such measly and pathetic moral fiber that it just seems like I would have been happy to show him the door had I been Winston Churchill. But I think he felt like it was just not within the spirit of the English people to abandon your duties. I think he felt like it was going to debilitate and weaken the country if their leader were to really abuse their trust in this way. Anyway, I mean, it all turned out for the good, as we said last time. But at this point, he's getting onto his yacht. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. He is really just beside himself in ecstasy and glee over what he's managed to do. He can finally have the woman that he loves, as he continues to tell everybody, the woman that I love, the woman that I love. And, you know, to hell with everybody else's feelings. Oh, you feel bad? I'll try to schedule some time to feel bad for you, but, you know, can't see when that's going to happen. So he gets on his yacht. The captain, Cecil Howe, had hurriedly had to borrow linen, crockery, and glasses from the royal yacht, and a surgeon commander had been brought on board in case the ex-king's state of mental stress should cause him to require any medical attention while at sea. Everybody's assuming that David's going to be having a hard time with this, assuming that he's going to understand the weight and worth of what he's just done. But no, he just couldn't be bothered to care. He's over there just being like, oh no, I don't feel bad. Let's have drinks. Let's talk about everything that's happened in the last 4 weeks. Ulick, Piers, come on, sit down. Let's talk about it. He keeps those guys up till 4 o'clock in the morning because he just wants to keep on talking. Let's just keep on talking. Let's keep rehashing. Let's keep talking about all the things and all the people who are against me, but all the people who were for me. Let's talk about how I've prevailed in getting what I want with the woman that I love. I mean, these two guys were exhausted. You know, it's like they're so tired, they're getting that feeling in their eyes that there's like sand in their eyes. They're so tired. They just want to go to bed. But no. David wants to keep on talking. Finally, he lets them go. A lot of the time that he was awake, while he's chit-chatting with them about all the events, he's sending farewell telegrams to all of his friends, you know. And the book says, much of the time was spent sending farewell cables to friends. Now, here they are on the yacht, right? They're going to France. And it says that when he was told that the wireless could not be used when the ship reached territorial waters, the Duke ordered the Fury back to sea until he finished his list. And then he had the unmitigated gall to happily confide to another close associate, Lord Peregrine Brownlow, about how much money he'd saved because all those cables were free. You guys, this man was king. Money is not a problem for him. And as we'll go on to read, he had quite a considerable fortune squirreled away that no one knew of. But here he is, over there, you know, giggling into his handkerchief about how much money he saves because he didn't have to pay for the telegrams to all his farewell cables to all these people who he knows is just going to be so sorry that he's left. The ship docked at dawn, and of course, the first thing he did was hightail it to a telephone because he's got to call Wallis. When I tell you that this man spent time either complaining, crying, acting foolish, or calling Wallis, those are his 4 things. That's what he knows how to do. Complain, whine, act foolish, and call Wallis, in that order. So he gets on the phone to Wallis, and she, meanwhile, had spent most of Saturday depressed about events, couldn't even get out of the bed. She was so distraught was she that he had actually done it, that he'd actually abdicated the throne for her. And one of her friends confided to a journalist, her friend Constance Coolidge confided to Helen Woodron Erskine after listening to the broadcast, that Wallis felt that this was a terrible fate that had befallen her. Her friend said, "Can you imagine a more terrible fate than to have to live up publicly to the legend of a love that you don't feel? To have to face morning, noon, and night a middle-aged boy with no other purpose in life than a possessive passion for you?" This is the way her friends identified her emotional state, as one being distraught because she was forced to live the rest of her days with a middle-aged boy who was besought with her, and there was nothing she could do about it. Wallis, who was 2 years younger than the Prince of Wales, had first been introduced to him at a weekend house party given by Lady Furness in January of 1931. And over the next 3 years, she saw him socially, and by January 1934, she'd become his mistress. Soon the prince began to talk of marriage, a situation that became more critical when he succeeded as king in January 1936. And Wallis was granted a divorce in October from her second husband, Ernest Simpson. Well, but see, the conundrum is this. Wallis Simpson is now twice divorced. She'd been married in her early 20s to this guy named Earl Winfield Spencer. He was an American naval aviator. That had ended in 1927. And now she's getting this divorce from Ernest Simpson. And that was a very complicated situation too. We'll go on to talk about some of the weirdness that surrounded that divorce. It was a very odd relationship that she and Ernest had. And the agreements that they had to getting that divorce, it was all very odd. Which led some people to believe that there had been some sort of collusion. It was all smoke and mirrors is what it was. We'll talk more about it in a minute. But the problem is this. The Church of England, of which the monarch is supreme governor, would not conduct the marriage of a divorced person if their spouse was still alive. The prince would clearly need to choose between marriage to Wallis and being king. And although Wallis had suggested they break off their relationship, David was determined to go ahead, even if that meant surrendering the throne. Now, as we said last time, I don't think that he even wanted to be king. This was a great excuse for him. Why would he want to be king? He hated responsibility. We're going to go on to read about the most childish man you've ever heard of. I mean, it makes Harry sound like an intellectual. But even apart from the fact that she was divorced, people had major questions about what kind of woman she was going to be if she was queen. She just seemed like she really lacked the moral fiber to be a queen. But then also, her political alignments were highly questionable. She had a lot of pro-German views. She had a lot of lovers. I mean, it was known that she did. Her affair with the Prince of Wales was hardly her first dilly-dally into the darkness of adultery. And the other thing, too, is the prince was wasting huge amounts of cash on her. I mean, the lavish gifts. He might have been a penny pincher in some ways. When it came to giving her everything she wanted, I mean, his purse had no limits. It was bottomless what he was willing to give her. So the expensive gifts, her pro-German views, her lovers, it just was all like, she seems like a real problem for us. We need to dispense. If he wants to go with her, go. But I mean, you're going to be exiled. But if you're good with that, may God be with you. So until the abdication actually happened, they decided to put her under police surveillance because they just weren't sure what they were dealing with here. But she didn't seem like she was pure as the driven snow. So in the reports of this police surveillance, it was said that Mrs. Simpson was regarded as a person very fond of the company of men and to have had many affairs. She was with different men at these addresses, which they give, and she seems to have spent a great deal of time with the Prince of Wales, though that did not mean that she did not have another secret lover who was also kept by her. And that guy has been identified as Guy Trundle, who was a salesman with the Ford Motor Company. So, I mean, Wallis, I think, it didn't even matter to her necessarily if the man had power. I think it was really more the game for her. Like, could she keep a man interested in her? Could she, like the game, the cat and mouse? I mean, because I don't think that a salesman with the Ford Motor Company is going to have exactly the same financial benefit to her as the crown prince. But I don't think that was always the point for her. I think it was the game. I think she loved manipulating. So, of course, the police are following her. They are very curious about all these lovers she seems to have all over the place. But also, to add to their concerns, was the fact that they felt like she was really manipulating the Prince of Wales for more money. Not just the lavish gifts, but I mean, it's not like he was just giving her all this jewelry. He was, but he was also giving her quite a stack of cash just to have. It says that the following month, Lyle Halsley, the Prince of Wales treasurer, wrote to George V's private secretary, Clive Wigram, that Wallis, quote, was at present receiving a very handsome income. I also told His Majesty that in my opinion, both Mrs. Simpson and her husband were just hand in glove in getting all that they could out of His Royal Highness. So, in their opinion, this was all, like, it wasn't just Wallis Simpson on her own over there milking the cow for all the cash. It was also her husband, who she hadn't divorced yet, also being like, hey, while you're over there, could you get me a little something, something? And she's like, yeah, we'll do. I mean, those two were like a couple of con artists. And as we'll go on to see at the end of the chapter, how far their con extended. Now, because there was so much concern that Wallis was, I mean, not just this random woman who he's having an affair with, but somebody who is kind of an operator of her own, they felt that these two needed to be separated until things could be sorted out financially, until they could get the okay to actually marry, until he had abdicated the throne and he could marry her. For legal reasons, they had to be separated. Now, it was against this backdrop that over the past few weeks, Wallis had been receiving threats on her life and hate mail. And not just threats on her life, her involvement with the Prince of Wales was causing a lot of angst in the public. And just after Christmas, a Canadian threatened to kill the Duke and was arrested in possession of a knife and a gun. So she's bringing danger to David. So, you know, compounded with the fact that she is an operator, she's of questionable moral integrity, she seems like she is manipulating him for money and for cash, not just her, but also her husband. It was, and now she's receiving death threats, but so is David. It was like, okay, we got to get these, separate, you guys. You two aren't even allowed in the same country. So she goes to stay in Cannes with some friends, and he is homeless. I mean, he has nowhere to go. He's on his yacht, but after he gets off the yacht, he's got nowhere to go. Now, it's important, and we'll see this play out later in the chapter, the people that she goes to stay with are friends that she's had for years. Remember, she's been married once when she was in her 20s and trying to get a quick divorce. She had traveled to China, where I guess I've read that she was given a quick divorce. I'm not really sure how that would work. I don't understand how you get married in America, but then you go to China and get a divorce. I don't get that. But that's what they say. And while she was there, she got to know this woman named Catherine Rogers. Now, Catherine Rogers was married to a man named Herman. And Herman Rogers and Wallis Simpson have a very weird relationship. Now, some say they were not lovers, they were just really good friends. But even in this chapter, I raise an eyebrow. If my husband had a friend like this, we would have some problems. So just putting it out there, the people that she's staying with are Catherine and Herman Rogers, whom she had met when she was in China. They were Americans there, and they've, I guess, maintained their friendship, and now they're hosting her in France, in Cannes. Well, okay. So that's where she is. Since they've had to be separated, they can't be together. And this is all just such torment for David, because all David wants to do is be with her. And now they're finding out after they've been separated that it may be that they can't even get married. The powers that be at the palace wanted to make sure, you know, what's going on here before they would grant David the right to marry her. So they feel like they've given up so much. It was all so that they could get married. And now there's the big question, well, will we even be able to get married, or is that going to be taken away from us? Now, in official circles, there were continued concerns about the Duke's supporters and Wallis's own ambitions. On December 10th, a Scotland Yard official had written to the commissioner stating that 2 personal protection officers needed to remain with her and Cannes, as indications were that she intended to flit off to Germany. A few days later, the officers reported a phone conversation where Wallis had told the Duke, attempting to sort out a post-abdication financial settlement, that, quote, if they don't get you these things, I will return to England and fight it out to the bitter end. The coronation will be a flop compared with the story that I shall tell the British press. So you can see why they felt that she was a concerning figure. She is over there twisting his arm, complaining he's not doing enough. She has certain financial requirements. She has certain things that she expects him to bring to the table when he shows up on her door. She doesn't just want him, she wants the money. And she had political interests of her own. And on December 10th, Horace Wilson, a senior civil servant, had written to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Neville Chamberlain, of his worries that Wallis Simpson intended, quote, not only to come back here, but aided by what she expects to be a generous provision from public funds, set up a court of her own, and there can be little doubt, to do her best to make things uncomfortable for the new occupant of the throne. It must not be assumed that she's abandoned hope of becoming Queen of England. It's known that she has limitless ambition, including a desire to interfere in politics. She's been in touch with the Nazi movement and has definite ideas as to dictatorship. In short, Wallis Simpson was a huge issue, not even just after the abdication, but the fear that she was going to push back if she didn't get the money that she wanted in the settlement. So she'd already been deeply disappointed that he'd abdicated the throne for a number of reasons. Certainly, I think she did not want to be joined to him for the rest of her life. He was not a person that she really had much respect for. She, in her personal correspondence, often referred to him as Peter Pan and made derogatory comments just about, what a drag he was to have to be around all the time. And obviously she was upset about having to be yoked to him. But the other thing she's upset about is he would have been king, which even if she wasn't queen, because she couldn't have married him, if she had been his mistress, she would have had quite a lot of sway over what he did. He didn't care for responsibility, and she could have been his puppet master in the way he conducted himself politically. So she was a huge problem, and getting her out of the way was going to require a lot of financial compromise for the palace. It's an interesting point that the night of the Duke's broadcast, there were 500 pro-Nazi supporters who had gathered at Buckingham Palace chanting, "We want Edward," and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, "We want Baldwin, dead or alive." You have to wonder if Wallis Simpson's affection for Nazi Germany is what influenced David to also share that affection. David does not strike me at all as a person who would have had even 2 seconds to think about politics. He doesn't seem to me like somebody who would have been the sort that read past a headline. He just seems to me to be extraordinarily shallow. He certainly was in matters of anything intellectual, so I don't feel like he would have had this burgeoning wisdom or interest when it came to politics. It may have been why it was so easy for him to be convinced of the Nazi point of view, because I don't think he would have looked at anything very deeply. But Wallis Simpson, I think, knew of what she was involving herself in and wasn't bothered by the heinousness of it. Anyway, her Nazi sympathies certainly strengthened his Nazi sympathies, and it was a known fact, enough so that when he was giving that broadcast, he had all these supporters, these Nazi supporters out in the street, screaming for him not to abdicate because they so desired somebody of his affections to reign and rule.